We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, under the coalition, interest rates went up once. Under your government, they've gone up 12 times. The Business Council warns Labor's economic credibility is on the line. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for Labor's bad decisions over the last 2 years, which have taken our country in the wrong direction and hurt Australian families?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I will take responsibility for Australia's economic performance since I've been Prime Minister and since the Treasurer has occupied the Treasury benches. I'll take responsibility for the fact that Australia has faster economic growth than Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan and the UK. I'll take responsibility, Mr Speaker, for the fact that Australia has a lower unemployment rate than the G7 countries Canada, France and Italy, and the same as the United States. I'll take responsibility for the fact that we have faster economic growth than Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United States and the UK, that is, than all 7 G7 countries, that Australia has a higher participation rate than Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United States and the United Kingdom. And I'll also take responsibility for the fact that we, unlike every single G7 nation, has produced budget surpluses. All of them are in deficit as we go forward. I will also take responsibility for the fact that we have delivered a tax cut for every taxpayer and that those opposite said that we should take that to an election. I'll take responsibility for the fact that next week we might find ourselves being in a position of having 1 million jobs created on our watch since we came into government. I'll take responsibility for the fact that we have put in place cost of living measures, including our power rebates for every household, not one lot of it, but 2, both of them opposed by those opposite. I'll take responsibility for the fact that if you're a pensioner, you can get cheaper medicines as a direct result of the policies that we've put in place. I'll take responsibility for the fact that over 500,000 Australians have benefited from fee-free TAFE and that 1.2 million Australian families have benefited from cheaper childcare. That's what I'll take responsibility for. The fact that at a time where there is global inflation and many countries have gone into recession, that we have kept Australia in the black, that we have kept our economy growing, that we have kept jobs being created and that wages are rising, that we want people to earn more and keep more of what they earn, the precise opposite of what those opposite want.
Before I call the member for Crangbite, the member for Deakin interjected 9 times during that one answer. We are not going to have continual interjections from individual members across the chamber. This has been happening far too much all throughout question time. The member for Deakin will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. Order. The Minister for Housing is now warned. If I'm taking action on a member, it is not the time to interject. Give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How will older Australians benefit from the Albanese government's once-in-a-lifetime aged care reforms?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question. For the past 2 years, the Albanese government has had our shoulders to the wheel lifting the standard of aged care. We've delivered a 15% increase to the minimum award wage for more than 250,000 aged care workers, with more to come. And today there is a registered nurse on site in aged care 99% of the time. Older Australians are receiving an additional 3.9 million minutes of care every single day. And today we announce a $5.6 billion package that will make sure older Australians have access to the aged care services they need and deserve. Our reforms will help 1.4 million Australians stay in their home for longer through a new program, Support at Home. Today we will introduce our new Rights-Based Aged Care Act. This is what ambition for aged care looks like. Our new Support at Home program, starting next year, will help more older Australians stay at home. Support at Home will cut wait times to receive in-home aged care services. It will deliver more tailored support, increasing levels of ongoing care from 4 to 8. It will ensure faster access to assistive technology like walkers and wheelchairs, and it will increase the maximum support available from $61,000 to $78,000. Support at Home will offer a temporary boost through more transitional assistance, and it will provide temporary access to palliative care. After the Treasurer handed down the 2024 budget, I travelled to North Queensland to meet with aged care recipients and the workers who care for them. I met Patricia and her in-home carer Chinatsu at her home in Warri, about 15 minutes outside of Cairns. Patricia relocated from Adelaide with her late partner Charlie in 1988. They moved into that home a week after arriving, and she's lived there ever since. And after Charlie passed away, Patricia has remained independent in her home with the support of Chinatsu, who visits 2 hours a fortnight for domestic assistance and a chat. When I asked Patricia what her plans for the future were, she told me firmly, "This is my home, I'm going to keep living here." And Patricia, today we are making that possible. The reforms we announced today will create better and safer care for Patricia and for all older Australians. Today we answer the question the Royal Commissioners could not agree upon: how to make aged care equitable and sustainable. Today we announce a new foundation for aged care that makes financial sense and makes sure older Australians will have access to the services they need and deserve.
Call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. Minister, how many hectares of native vegetation are designated to be cleared to develop the 60 renewable energy projects you announced in question time yesterday?
The call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Well, thanks so much. I want to thank the Leader of the National Party for that question. And I want to say that it's obvious that it depends on the renewable energy project itself how much vegetation would have to be cleared.
Order.
In some cases, very little vegetation will be cleared. If we're talking about, well, it depends on the project. There's 60 of them right across the country. But I can understand why the Nationals are so sensitive about this, because while they were in government, there were 22 separate energy policies. They didn't land a single one of them.
Order.
There were 24...
The Chief Government Whip. I want to hear from the Leader of the Nationals on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, that was a very tight question. I seek your ruling. There was a very specific question about the number of hectares on the announcement made yesterday. There was no compare and contrast. It was a very tight question. I seek your ruling, Mr Speaker.
I want to make sure the Minister is adhering to standing orders. She wasn't asked about any other alternative policies. She won't be able to compare or contrast. I can appreciate the Leader would like a figure or a number, but as we have said this time and time again, I can't compel the Minister to give a specific number or figure, but she'll need to remain relevant to the questions about the native vegetation schedule that has been cleared, or the number that has been cleared, and the measures mentioned in her answer in question time yesterday. And not another great deal of topics can be brought into the answer. She has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. we're working with proponents on all of these projects to minimise any impact on matters of national environmental significance, and that would include land clearing where it's necessary. But it's interesting that the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Nationals, is only interested in land clearing when it comes to renewable energy projects. He's not interested in land clearing if it's a mining project, he's not interested in land clearing if it's a housing project, and he's not interested in land clearing when it's the Shadow Treasurer poisoning grasslands with his companies.
Order. Members on my right. The member for Hasluck will leave the chamber under 94A. We're not having interjections when I'm taking points of order. Rules apply to everyone inside the chamber. Manager on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, Standing Order 91C says that a member's conduct is disorderly if the member wilfully refuses to conform to a standing order. Now, you've given the minister a very clear direction in terms of relevance. She's flouting that direction, and I submit to you that she is in breach of the standing orders.
Order. Just hear from the Leader of the House.
To the point of order, at the exact moment that the Manager of Opposition rose to his feet, the minister was talking about land clearing. She was talking about... It was an exact example of land clearing.
Order.
Thanks, Speaker.
Members on my right. The member for Wannon is entitled to raise a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. The minister also made an unparliamentary slur against the Shadow Treasurer, and I would ask that she would withdraw that.
Okay. Order. The Shadow Treasurer will not be baited by any interjections. I'll deal with this matter. I assume it was about the remark regarding the member for Hume. So we're just going to ask the minister to withdraw that comment and refine her remarks to assist the House to the question she was asked. She is entitled to talk about land clearing and native vegetation, but I'll be listening very carefully to make sure she is being directly relevant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I mean, native vegetation does include rare grasslands.
Just pause a moment. To assist the House, I've asked the minister to withdraw.
To pay respect to you, Mr Speaker, I do that. I've got... I withdraw.
The member for Wannon, I'll handle this. Just going to get the minister... Oh, thank you, and the minister will continue to be directly relevant.
Mr Speaker, I've got a great quote here from the Leader of the National Party about clearing.
I want it to be order. The member... No, we're going to do this the right way, but if this continues on for too much longer, we won't be taking points of order. Question time can't descend into this behaviour. The member for New England on a point of order.
Speaker, I wonder if the minister would be able to table the document that was handed by the dispatch box to the Prime Minister.
I'll resume your seat.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Is the minister reading from confidential No. Is the minister reading from confidential documents?
It's a confidential document, Mr Speaker, but there are some elements that I would like to share with the chamber, if that's okay. One of them is,
Order.
in fact...
The Leader of the Opposition... No. The Leader of the Opposition, members on my left, are going to remain silent. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
One of them is a quote from the member for New England. We've made massive investments in the New England into renewable energy. I made sure it happened. Another is from the member for Maranoa. We actually want Maranoa to become the renewable energy electorate. Western Downs Shire is screaming at me to become the renewable energy shire of the country with solar and wind. We've got another one from the member for Farrer. I'm so proud that the biggest renewable energy producer is right here in Yenda. Mr Speaker.
Order. The Leader of the Nationals will cease objecting. The Minister's just got to return to the question.
Mr Speaker, each one of these projects required some land clearing. And of course, if the projects are good projects, then they go ahead. That's how we make decisions.
Order. The member for Barker. I'd like to hear from the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government securing a better future for older Australians?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Boothby for her question and for her passionate advocacy for people in aged care and in other social services prior to her entry into the parliament as the member for Boothby. Mr Speaker, today we are putting the care back into aged care. We're announcing the greatest improvement to aged care in 30 years. Now, at the heart of our government's aged care reforms are a simple set of principles, providing dignity, choice, respect and quality of care to older Australians. More Australians are living longer, and that is a good thing. But I know that older Australians also worry about going into aged care, and I know that their kids and grandkids do too. This is about caring for the generation that cared for us. Older Australians built this country and what they deserve, to have dignity and respect in retirement. That's why in previous aged care legislation we have ensured that now nurses are back into nursing homes, 99% of the time. And there's some 3.9 million minutes of additional care for residents every single day as a result of the reforms that we have put in place. Now, as a result of the reforms that we've announced today, with bipartisan support, and I thank the opposition for their constructive engagement on these issues, there are around 1.4 million Australians who will benefit from a new Support at Home program by 2035, helping them remain independent in their home and their community for longer. And the feedback that all of us have had from family, from neighbours, from the communities we represent, is that that is overwhelmingly what older Australians want, to retain that connection with their home. Now, these changes will result some $5.6 billion will be invested in a reform package that includes extra money for the Support at Home package, comes into effect on the 1st of July next year. Changes to improve the funding, viability and quality of residential aged care, including support for regional aged care facilities. New laws to protect older Australians in aged care. Now, reforms like this don't happen every day. We know that we have an ageing population. The IGR report indicates exactly why this is a big challenge. Previous governments haven't been able to get this done. We are getting this done, and it is in the interests of older Australians and those of us who one day, every Australian, we hope, becomes an older Australian. We all have an interest in getting this right, and that's why this is such critical legislation.
Prime Minister's time is concluded. Call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Emissions are now higher under you than when Scott Morrison left office. You've broken promises to protect people against discrimination and to recognise Palestine. You've said you'll gut your own weak environment laws and won't ban gambling ads, cap and freeze rent increases, end tax handouts to wealthy property investors or stop supermarket price gouging. Small targets won't fix Australia's big problems. So does the Prime Minister understand why so many people are disappointed in Labor?
Order. The Minister for Financial Services will cease interjecting. Order. There's far too much noise when that question was being asked. The Prime Minister has the call.
I think Australians understand that I lead a government that gets things done. That makes a difference. Unlike the Greens political party, who are quite happy to have members of parliament who attend demonstrations that are violent, that throw things against police, that engage in disruption, because the big difference between a party of government and a party of protest is that we are responsible, that we work through issues constructively across this chamber in order to make a positive difference. And what my government has been able to do, unlike many governments right around the world, is to see us through really difficult economic times whilst making sure that we put that downward pressure on inflation while we are also looking after people on the way through. My job is also, of course, as a Labor Prime Minister, to support jobs. And we've created some 980,000 of them have been created since we came into office. The other thing that we have done, of course, is increasing wages making a difference, including for aged care workers, for childcare workers in the legislation that was introduced earlier here today. We've also, when it comes to gender issues, we have the lowest gender pay gap on record. We have engaged in our childcare reforms, paid parental leave, super on paid parental leave, making a difference in those areas. We've introduced and started the National Anti-Corruption Commission, something that was promised by previous governments but never done. On housing, we have a $32 billion Homes for Australia plan, some of which is still being blocked by the Greens and the Coalition in the Senate, and we'll wait and see how they vote next week. But we are dealing with the immediate pressures which are there, whilst also having a plan for the future that includes taking advantage of the global transition to net zero that is so important. We have a 43% reduction target by 2030 that's legislated and net zero by 2050 that's legislated. But you don't get there by hoping and a wishing. You get there by having serious policies that drive the change through. Hence the safeguard mechanism, the capacity investment scheme, the National Reconstruction Fund, all of these programs making a difference as we go forward as well. That's how you take advantage, and as well making sure that communities aren't left behind. That's why we have the Net Zero Authority as well, making a difference, that communities aren't left behind, so that we train Australians for the jobs of the future.
Cool. Member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's aged care reforms deliver better care in a more sustainable way?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As you know, the member for Blair is a wonderful Queenslander and a terrific local member, and I'm grateful to him for the question. And to keep the Queensland theme going, I wanted to pay tribute to the Aged Care Minister for the absolute mountain of work that she has done to get to the point that we've got to today, with the help of the Health Minister, the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister and everyone on this side of the House, and indeed across the Parliament, Mr Speaker. It's a very good thing that Australians are living longer and healthier lives. And this is how we fund the care that Australians need and deserve, and they age. It's about better care for more people in a more sustainable way. And we're very conscious here, Mr Speaker, of our intergenerational responsibilities. If you look at the intergenerational report, it tells us that over the next 40 years the number of people over 65 will double and the number of people over 85 will triple, and any serious government needs to take this challenge very seriously, and this opportunity as well. Government spending in aged care over that period is expected to double as a share of the economy, and that makes it one of the fastest growing areas of government spending in the budget. There are 5 big areas of government spending: aged care, healthcare, NDIS, defence and interest costs. And what this government has shown is a real willingness and a real ability to deal with some of those structural challenges in the budget: the NDIS, defence, interest costs and today aged care as well. And so what we're doing, Mr Speaker, is we're turning those big Liberal deficits in the near term into Labor surpluses at the same time as we deal with some of the big structural pressures in the budget as well. And so the announcement today made by the Prime Minister and the Aged Care Minister is all about improving aged care and strengthening the budget at the same time. It is a step change in care and it is a structural reform to the budget at the same time as well. Now, the net impact of the changes that the Minister has announced today is a $930 million spend over 4 years and a $12.6 billion save over the course of the next 10 years. Now, aged care spending will continue to grow, but at an average of 5.2%, not 5.7% over the decade, and it will moderate as a share of the economy as well, Mr Speaker. Now, this is all about making sure that we can provide much better care to many more Australians as they age and live longer and healthier lives, and to make sure that we do that in the most responsible and sustainable way that we can. This is a very important economic reform that has been announced today, a very important economic reform. It will make the budget more sustainable, but much more important than that, it will mean that we can afford to provide the care that older Australians need and deserve as they age. And I pay tribute to the Minister, the Government and indeed the Parliament for agreeing this important progress.
Concluded. The call to the Shadow Treasurer.
My question is to the Treasurer. Last week the Treasurer accused the RBA of smashing the economy, and the national accounts revealed productivity going backwards, real disposable income collapsing and Australians paying more tax and more for their mortgages after 18 months of household recession. EY Chief Economist Sherelle Murphy said this is the worst possible combination of statistics. Will the Treasurer take responsibility for Labor's bad decisions over the last 2 years, which have taken our country in the wrong direction and hurt Australian families?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about pressures on families and on Australians. When we came to office, real wages were going backwards and now they're growing again. I'm asked about productivity. Those opposite oversaw the weakest decade for productivity growth in the last 60 years. I'm asked about tax. Those opposite wanted to go to an election because we wanted to give a tax cut to every single Australian taxpayer and not just some Australian taxpayers, Mr Speaker. And so whether it is living standards, whether it's productivity or whether it's tax, those opposite have a shameful record, an indefensible record when it comes to those things that were core to the Shadow Treasurer's question a moment ago.
The Treasurer will pause. The member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance. The Treasurer is a serial offender. There was no compare and contrast in that question. As I say, he is a serial offender, and we ask your ruling on that.
The Treasurer has been using the question to show the difference between what the government has done, and the question was about taking responsibility for Australia's direction and putting pressure on Australia's family. It does make common sense that the Treasurer would be talking about where, well, just let me finish, where Australia is now and where it was, in his opinion, about what the differences are. But he won't be able to have his entire answer about that, and well, if he does, he won't be able to give the full answer. So the Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I get it. I'm asked about productivity, living standards and tax, but Shadow Treasurer doesn't want me talking about productivity, living standards or tax. Mr Speaker, I get that. Now, I'm asked whether I take responsibility. I'm asked whether I take responsibility for the government's part in the fight against inflation, and I do. And I've said that, I think, on each occasion, each question time during the course of this week, and I say that again. I take responsibility for our part in the fight against inflation. And that means taking responsibility for the fact that when we came to office, inflation was 6.1%. In the year that we were elected, 7.8%. It's half that now. And so I take responsibility for our part in that effort. I take responsibility for turning 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 big Labor surpluses. And I'll tell you by the end of the month how big that second surplus is. I take responsibility, Mr Speaker, for almost $80 billion in savings. I take responsibility for the fact that we've banked and not spent almost all of the upward revision to revenue. I take responsibility for the fact that the Governor of the Reserve Bank has herself said that our couple of surpluses that we've already delivered are helping in the fight against inflation. I take responsibility, along with the Prime Minister and the colleagues, for the cost of living help. that we are rolling out to people right now, Mr Speaker. I take responsibility for the fact that despite the opposition of those opposite, every Australian taxpayer is getting a tax cut. I take responsibility for the fact that every household is getting energy bill relief. I take responsibility for the fact that early childhood education is cheaper and medicines are cheaper and real wages are growing again, Mr Speaker. I take responsibility for our part in the fight against inflation. We are making progress, but we know that people are still under pressure, and that's why it beggars belief that those opposite don't support help with the cost of living and they want to pull another $315 billion out of an economy which is already weak.
Call to the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government addressing the need to protect young Australians through limiting access to social media, and what other measures are being considered to make online environments safer for children?
Give a call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for their question. This is a very important issue, and as I said yesterday, many parents are telling us they need help. And that's what our legislation is about. Our message to parents is clear. We have your back. But I do acknowledge the valid points raised by experts that we cannot stop there. And we need to take forward a range of reforms in regulating tech companies to make their services safer. As I said yesterday, we will consult. There's understandably a wide variety of views, but as a government, our objective is clear. Mr Speaker, restricting children's access to social media is not a magic pill to addressing all online harms, and our actions to improve online safety are not set and forget. We have taken a comprehensive approach as a government to tackling online harms for all Australians. Earlier this year, I amended the basic online safety expectations, requiring platforms to place the best interest of the child at the centre of their products and services. And this has already empowered the eSafety Commissioner to issue notices to the platforms on the number of children using their services and the age assurance measures they have in place. And we have provided funding so previously neglected initiatives on media literacy are now available in schools across Australia for free. Minister Rishworth and I delivered an Australia-first dating app industry code to improve the safety of Australians using those services. The Attorney-General is driving reforms to tackle hate speech and bolster privacy protections, particularly for children, and has criminalised the creation and distribution of non-consensual deepfake pornography. The Assistant Treasurer is delivering vital reforms to make digital platforms accountable for protecting Australians from scams. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government's system-wide approach is what is needed to tackle the harms facing Australians, particularly young people online. And it's why I brought forward the statutory review of the Online Safety Act by a full year. Though it only came into force in January 2022, I was compelled to expedite this because it was clear our laws were not keeping pace with emerging technologies and associated harms. It's examining how we can make online spaces safer and ensure that eSafety has the power they need to keep Australians safe. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government will not resolve from holding big tech to account and keeping Australians safe online, particularly our most vulnerable. We are alive to these issues right across government, and we are delivering to make the online environment safer and better.
Before I call the Shadow Treasurer, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the Speaker's Gallery today is a parliamentary delegation from the National Assembly of Vietnam, led by the Vice President, Her Excellency Ms Nguyen Thi Tan. Welcome to you all. The call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Does the Treasurer take responsibility for 12 interest rate increases?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. He forgot one. He forgot one. Mr Speaker, interest rates started going up on the watch of those opposite. Isn't it interesting? Isn't that interesting, Mr Speaker, that he forgot the first one?
Order.
Isn't that interesting that he forgot the first one? I don't think that was an accident, Mr Speaker. I don't think that was an accident. He was hoping that nobody noticed that interest rates started going up on their watch. And they started going up on their watch because when they were in office, inflation was 6.1% and it was rising, Mr Speaker. And that's why interest rates started going up when he was the most embarrassing member of a bad government, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer's just going to hold it for a sec. The Shadow Treasurer on a
relevance, Mr Speaker. That was very deliberately a very, very tight question which he has been completely unwilling to engage on and be even slightly relevant towards.
The Minister for Industry will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has been talking about the interest rates. He wasn't asked about interest rates before. He's talking about the last 12, but he's less than 1 minute in, so I'll ask him to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The interest rates which began rising before the change of government are putting substantial pressure on people, and that's a point that I've been making since the middle of the year.
The member for Hume has asked his question. I'm going to ask the member for Hume to cease interjecting all through this answer.
Now, those opposite might not think that's the case, but the interest rate rises which began before the election are putting substantial pressure on people. We understand that. And that's why we take so seriously our responsibilities when it comes to the fight against inflation. And as I said a moment ago, our part of the fight against inflation is making sure that we're getting the budget in better nick, to making sure that as we roll out this substantial and meaningful cost of living help that we do it in the most responsible way, that we invest in the supply side of the economy as well, in housing and skills and energy, and in a future made in Australia as well. Those are our responsibilities. Now, the Reserve Bank has their job to do and I have my job to do. And as the Reserve Bank Governor has said on a number of occasions now, we've got the same objective, but we've got different responsibilities. And I think that's self-evident. And so, Mr Speaker, when it comes to the pressures that people are under, whether it's the consequence of persistent inflation, whether it's the global economic uncertainty, whether it's the impact of the rate rises which began before the election, we know that people are under pressure, but more than acknowledge that, we're doing something about it. And it beggars belief, as I said before, Mr Speaker, that the whole parliament doesn't agree that people deserve and need some help with the cost of living. And we're rolling out tax cuts and energy bill relief, cheaper early childhood education, cheaper medicines, getting wages moving again and helping people with their rent, because we do take responsibility for our part in the fight against inflation. We recognise the Reserve Bank's got their job to do. We've got a different job to do. We've got the same objective, which is to get on top of this inflation challenge, which was already galloping when we came to office. And one of the consequences of how seriously we have taken it, working with the bank, is that inflation has halved since the year we came to office.
That's right. Call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. Why is paying superannuation on paid parental leave so important for supporting parents with a new baby and closing the gender gap in retirement savings? What has been the response, and how does this differ to other approaches?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Canberra for that question and know that she's been a passionate advocate for paid parental leave for so many years. Of course, Speaker, today the House passed an important reform that will boost superannuation balances of parents and help close the gender gap in retirement savings. Now, in fact, women retire with 25% less superannuation than men, an estimated $51,000 less on average, according to the Super Members Council. Now, we know that women who have lower superannuation at retirement, in some cases, can face higher risk of homelessness and higher risk of income instability. And as the Women's Economic Task Force put it, women too often pay the motherhood penalty when it comes to retirement savings. Now, Labor's plan to pay superannuation on paid parental leave will help address this inequity. And the bill passed today in this House is a positive investment in the future of working parents. Now, Speaker, I've been asked what the responses have been to our plan to add superannuation onto paid parental leave. Well, Georgie Dent from the Parenthood said that our plan to pay superannuation on paid parental leave was a game changer for families right across Australia. Brand Black from the Business Council of Australia said adding superannuation contributions to the government payment is the right thing to do for both women and the economy. And the Australian Council of Social Services Chief Executive Cassandra Goldie said that policies that boost women's financial security make social and economic sense. Every single dollar added to someone's superannuation account matters. And, Mr Speaker, while the response to Labor's plan has been widely welcomed, equally the response has been damning to those opposite's plan to attack women's retirement savings. Of course, the Super Members Council said that the opposition's proposal sent a deeply concerning message to women that they should sacrifice their future financial security to pay for their daily expenses. The ACTU President, Michelle O'Neill, said no Australian should have to trade off supporting their babies now and feeding themselves in old age. But it really does feel like Groundhog Day when it comes to those opposite. Just another day of wrecking and negativity when it comes to superannuation and when it comes to paid parental leave. It is disappointing but not surprising. It is only Labor that is on the side of new parents and ensuring that Australia has a strong, flexible and equitable paid parental leave scheme.
Call to the member for Casey.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Cecil from Badger Creek, in my electorate of Casey, contacted me about his gas bill and said, and I quote, "Just received our gas bill, double the price, now $582. How does this PM in Canberra think pensioners are going to stop from freezing? Will the Treasurer take responsibility for Labor's bad decisions over the last 2 years, which have taken our country in the wrong direction and hurt Australian families?"
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I hope he told Cecil that every time we've put forward cost of living relief, those opposite have opposed it. I hope he was up front with Cecil about that. I hope when Cecil was telling him these very real concerns that Cecil has about the cost of living, I hope he told Cecil that only this side of the House is trying to help him and that side of the House is trying to stop us providing cost of living help. And while he was at it, Mr Speaker, I hope he told Cecil that in the $315 billion that the Shadow Treasurer says is overspending is pension indexation. I hope he said to Cecil, look, we know you're under cost of living pressure, but the Shadow Treasurer in the blue team in the Canberra, in the Parliament, wanders around the press gallery saying that pension indexation is overspending, and it's part of the $315 billion that those opposite describe as too much spending in the economy. Now, the difference between this side of the House and that side of the House is we're trying to help Cecil. We're trying to help Cecil. And those opposite, every time we try and help Cecil, those opposite try and stand in the way. And every time we point out to the Parliament and to the people beyond the Parliament that the $315 billion they want to cut would do untold damage to the pensioners of this country, including, by the sounds of it, Cecil, every time we say that those opposite need to come clean on these cuts, Cecil should keep an ear out. Cecil should keep an ear out, Mr Speaker. He should keep an ear out. He should keep an ear out for when those opposite come clean about the impact of their cuts on his household budget, Mr Speaker. This side of the House, the Labor side of the House, is trying to help him. That side of the House is trying to harm him with $315 billion in cuts, including the indexation of the pension.
We need a reset after that. Okay. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Why is the Albanese Labor government delivering a pay rise for early childhood educators? And what has been the response?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the awesome member for Aston for her question. Mr Speaker, early educators up in the gallery and right across the country are some of the most important workers in this country. But you wouldn't know that from what they're paid. This morning I introduced legislation to help change that. Legislation to increase what they're paid by 15%. A 10% pay rise from December this year and a further 5% from December next year. We've got 30,000 more early educators in Australia today than we had 2 years ago when we came to office. But the truth is we need more. And this 15% pay rise will help everyone that does this essential work now to keep doing it, but also hopefully encourage people who love this job but felt like they had to leave it because they couldn't afford to keep doing it to come back and do this again. Mr Speaker, in your electorate, Jessica, who works at Good Start in Bellbird Park, said this morning. Now that this pay rise is coming through, I can actually stay and do what I love, teach children. And that's what this is. It's not babysitting, it's education.
Order.
It's teaching our children.
No, the Minister's going to pause. The member for Cowper has been injecting all throughout question time. Not sure why, but he's going to now leave the chamber under 94A. Treasurer, the Minister for Education in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. This is also important economic reform because more people like Jessica means more children and more parents can take advantage of the life-changing work that they do. This is a pay rise for people like Jessica, but more than that, it is also a price cap to keep prices down for more than 1 million families right across the country. And it's the first step that we need to take to build a truly universal early education system. And soon I'll release the Productivity Commission's final report on this. But more than that, this is about respect. Respect for these workers in the gallery today and right across the country. Respect for mums and dads and the decisions that they take. And respect that the Liberal Party finds hard to muster. Last time we did this, they didn't just oppose it, they didn't just vote against it, they actually condemned it. And this time, when we announced this pay rise, they said that it would destroy the family unit. Paying people like Jessica Moore, some of the most important and underpaid workers in this country, should be backed, not bagged. And that's what this does, a pay rise for workers like Jessica and price caps for parents. If that's not legislation that the Liberal Party should back, I don't know what is.
Call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Minister, the Morrison government massively increased the cost of arts, business and law degrees from $16,000 to $51,000, $85,000 for a combined degree. At the time, Labor said that this change would make it harder and more expensive for young people to get an education, and the University Accord agreed. When will this government address the unfair cost of university degrees?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Kooyong for her question. I know how passionate she is about this issue and more broadly about how we build a better and a fairer education system in this country. You're right, the Universities Accord made specific recommendations about this and made the point that the former government's Job Ready Graduates program had failed. And it made recommendations about how to address this. I've announced that we will establish an Australian Tertiary Education Commission that will help to steer reform here, and that includes the setting of course fees. I'm consulting with the university sector and the broader community at the moment about how we establish that Australian Tertiary Education Commission and its roles and responsibilities. So I hope that that directly addresses the question that you have asked. The Universities Accord is a blueprint for reform of higher education for the next decade and beyond. It's bigger than one budget, but we've bitten off a big chunk of it in this year's budget, about 29 of the 47 recommendations in full or in part. That includes wiping $3 billion of student debt for more than 3 million Australians. It includes introducing for the first time ever paid prac financial support to help teaching and nursing and social work students with the cost of living while they do the practical part of their degree. And it also includes, and I know you know this because you've been a champion of this, the establishment of a national student ombudsman. University should be a great place where you learn new skills, get the qualifications you need to succeed, make new friends. But we've seen too much evidence of when terrible things happen at university, where the system fails, where when the worst happens, universities don't respond properly. That's what that legislation that I introduced yesterday is all about fixing. For too long, universities haven't done enough, and governments haven't done enough. And that's what that legislation I introduced yesterday is about trying to fix.
Give the call to the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How does the Albanese Labor government's commitment to a 15% wage increase support Australia's early childhood education and care workforce?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hawke for his question and for his continued advocacy for early childhood education and for early childhood educators in his electorate. Significant, momentous, historic, monumental moment, a life jacket, proof that early learning matters, life-changing. Just some of the words that early childhood education and early childhood education advocates have used to describe the Albanese Labor government's 15% wage increase for early childhood educators. For too long, early childhood educators have been fighting for respect, for fairness and a world-class early childhood education and care system. And Mr Speaker, when I was first elected in 2016, along with many of my colleagues here, I signed a pledge to properly value the professionalism and the highly skilled work that early childhood educators and teachers do. And today, Mr Speaker, this government announced legislation to lock in this commitment, to recognise and pay a workforce that has for far too long been taken for granted and for far too long been neglected. This means that 200,000 early childhood workers right across Australia will have at least $100 more a week more in their pay packets by the end of this year. And by the end of next year, that's going to be $150 more in their pay packet. It means they'll have a livable wage, Now, Jessica, a passionate early childhood educator, said this. She said that this pay rise means early educators won't struggle to get by. We'll comfortably know that we can pay the bills and put food on the table. It means proper recognition. As Leanne, a 19-year veteran of the sector, said this. She said, to be recognised as professionals and to have a wage that reflects that is a huge step forward, not only for educators, but for children and their families. It means that along with this government's tax cuts, that early childhood education workers will be able to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. It means we can build a strong and stable early learning workforce, Mr Speaker, and achieve that vision for universal early childhood education and care system that is affordable, that is accessible and that is inclusive for every child in Australia. This is what the children of Australia deserve. It's what the families of Australia deserve. And it's what the Albanese Labor government is delivering.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Treasurer.
Joe Massey owns a furniture shop in the Treasurer's electorate of Rankin and told The Australian he believed the RBA might need to raise rates further to get on top of inflation. He said, quote, "The Treasurer should not be spending more money." Will the Treasurer take responsibility for Labor's bad decisions over the last 2 years, which have taken our country in the wrong direction and hurt Australian families?
Order. Give a call to the member for Banks is warned. Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You know, yesterday I was saying to the Infrastructure Minister and the Defence Minister, I really hope they ask me about the front of the Australian. and I didn't think that I would be this lucky, but it turns out that a day later, Mr Speaker, I am. And they're asking me about some wonderful people in my local community, Joe, Marbrook, Kate, and my great friends Nikki and Tyson. And the story on the front of the Australian yesterday, and I welcome the interest from the Australian, I welcome the visit, and they spoke to some of the business leaders and business owners in my local community. And I want to say to each of them, all 5 of them, and to every small business person in my electorate, I'm proud to represent you. I'm proud to represent you. And the issues raised by Joe and Marbrook and Kate and Nikki and Tyson were issues that are raised with us right around Australia right now, and they are part of the motivation, they are part of the inspiration for the cost of living help that this government and this Prime Minister are rolling out. Because unlike those opposite, we don't hear that people are under pressure and then ignore their very real needs and concerns. When we hear that people are under pressure, we act to do something about it, Mr Speaker, and we give every taxpayer a tax cut. We give every household energy bill relief and 1 million small businesses energy bill relief, which those opposite don't support, Mr Speaker. We make early childhood education and medicines cheaper, and we provide help with rent, and we get wages moving again, Mr Speaker. And so yesterday I didn't think that they would ask me what my message would be to those wonderful people in my local community. The other thing that I say to those wonderful people, and if I may, Mr Speaker, particularly to my great friend Nikki Patty, I say to Nikki and to Tyson and all of those people, thank you. Thank you for your leadership in our local community. And I'm asked about those great friends in the Australian yesterday. I want to say this about Nikki. I want to tell the whole House about Nikki, because he rang me yesterday mortified that he had somehow given a different impression to the impression that he wanted to give. But I reassured him that if those opposite read to the end of the story, and it doesn't appear that they have, this is what Nikki said about myself and the State Treasurer of Queensland. This is what Nikki said, and I'm quoting, "How good is it? 2 Logan boys are running the finances for the country and for Queenslanders. They understand," he said. "They see the struggle," he said. "I know that Jim and Cameron are doing such a great job," he said. "Those 2 boys are doing the best they can to ease the cost of living for people." I say to you, Nikki, and Nikki's a red-hot chance to be watching from specific barbers in Kingston in my electorate. I say, how you doing, Nikki? Thanks for the kind words.
Order. Order. Members on my right. The member for Cunningham. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. The member for Hume and the member for O'Connor. Clapping is highly disorderly. If this continues, people will be removed immediately. Member for Hunter has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to deliver pay rises for Australians? What threats are there to people's pay?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Industrial Relations.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Hunter for the question, because the moment the member for Hunter arrived here, he was asking for us to legislate for workers in his area to be able to get pay rises. And once we'd legislated, he started asking questions about what those pay rises were that had been delivered. And what's changed this week, as of the Leader of the Opposition speech yesterday, is now we're not simply talking about pay rises that have been delivered, we're now talking about pay cuts that are being threatened by the Leader of the Opposition. And so I can say to the member for Hunter that the The speech yesterday referred specifically to the pay rise that Danielle, who I previously referred to, who works at the Mount Pleasant mine, has received. So the information now that when people go back to their electorates they can explain is someone like Danielle is now being promised at the next election that if the Leader of the Opposition's in government, she would get a $33,000 pay cut. Because the same job, same pay provisions that he referred to in his speech yesterday are the only reason she got the pay rise. The Leader of the Opposition might be able to, on the plane home, explain this afternoon to the flight attendants there, who don't just provide a service role, they're trained in safety, they play a really important role, flight attendants on the plane, that the pay rises that they're just finding out about now through the Fair Work Commission are now promised to be pay cuts at the next election that the Leader of the Opposition is taking in his industrial relations policy. So for those people who were employed labour hire and were being paid $16,000 less than the people they work side by side with, the Leader of the Opposition, as of yesterday, is now taking to the election a promise that their pay will be cut by $16,000. And it's not only people who are affected by the same job, same pay provisions. People might remember the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill dealt with multi-employer bargaining. The speech yesterday had a direct attack and a promise to get rid of multi-employer bargaining. Now, people who are involved in air conditioning systems around the country, the sheet metal workers, they've now received a 26% pay rise in their enterprise agreement that the Leader of the Opposition is promising to get rid of the principles that have caused that to be the case. So goes to the next election promising a pay cut for those people working in air conditioning. We've had the exact example today of the early childhood educators. Their pay rise process started with multi-employer bargaining. This Leader of the Opposition goes to the election wanting to cut their pay.
Give the call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Prime Minister. Mental health organisations like Reach Out, Headspace, Solana and Madeline and others say an age ban on social media won't work, that it may cut young people off from support and expose them to new harms. EU countries have moved on big tech's algorithms, while Australia falls behind, and constituents in Goldstein and across the country battle everything from misogynistic content to gambling and eating disorder triggers. Why doesn't the government properly deal with this and make the social media companies take responsibility for their algorithms?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Goldstein for her question. I know that she's genuine about her concern on this issue and issues of youth mental health, body image and eating disorders and social media and its impact. In particular, I would like to acknowledge her genuine and tireless engagement with a very broad range of stakeholders, including young people themselves, into these issues. I also acknowledge the member's joint report with the Butterfly Foundation that I've had a look at from May 2024, where the member for Goldstein had a round table, it would appear from the photo here in Parliament House, in order to engage directly about these issues. And I do note, though, that the report recommends very clearly, recommendation 10, social media platforms be required to have accurate age verification for all accounts and clearly articulate what these are and measure and report on their efficacy. So the people as well who I've engaged with, who the Minister for Communications have engaged with, who members of our Cabinet and members of the government have engaged with, parents on the sidelines of footy games and netball courts on the weekend, parents talking after school, all really concerned. They want their young ones off their devices and onto those footy fields and onto those tennis courts or swimming pools, whatever it is. They want their young people, their children and their grandchildren for that matter, to have real experiences with real people. And that is why we have taken the decision that we have. Now, on the matter of algorithms that the member raises, our statutory review of the Online Safety Act, led by Delia Rickard, is currently looking into algorithms and will recommend systems that empower them and will report next month. The review is a broad-ranging examination of the effectiveness of the Act and will consider whether additional protections are needed for harmful online material. We brought forward this review early because we do recognise the need to keep up with changing technology and keep up with emerging harms. In the meantime, we've funded and commenced a new phase of our Stop It at the Start campaign to tackle online misogyny. But we've also established a joint select committee into social media to continue the important policy development work. I know that this is an issue that concerns every member of this parliament, and I know more important than that is it concerns every parent out there. This has been raised with me over recent years more than any other issue, and that is why my government's determined to act and to get that action right, which is why we're doing the trial that was funded in the budget in May.
Call to the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How's the Albanese Labor government putting downward pressure on energy bills, and how does this compare to other proposals?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question and, of course, her leadership in one of Australia's great energy producing regions and her leadership here in the House. And, Mr Speaker, we know that we need to put downward pressure on energy prices because Australians need that, Mr Speaker, and that's why they need the energy bill relief in the last budget and the budget before. And that energy bill relief is, of course, included in the $315 billion hit list that the Shadow Minister for Finance put out earlier this week. She actually called it a Ponzi scheme. That's what the opposition thinks of energy bill relief for Australians, which they are receiving on their bills today, Mr Speaker. They're receiving that relief now. And, of course, we're also building cheaper, reliable, renewable energy across the country. And last week, when I was in Collie, when I was in Bunbury and when I was in Traralgon, I was able to announce progress, Mr Speaker, with new batteries, 6 new batteries which will support 1 million houses across the national energy network, and, of course, Mr Speaker, 4-hour batteries, and, of course, Mr Speaker, new renewable energy in a big pipeline in Western Australia, Mr Speaker. Now, I'm asked by the honourable member what proposals we reject. Now, I'm going to use the term proposal lightly, Mr Speaker, because we don't really have a detailed policy proposal from the Leader of the Opposition. 85 days ago, he put out 7 sites. No details, no costings, no information. 85 days ago, we saw 7 nuclear reactor sites released. But I do have news for the House, Mr Speaker. I've got big news for the House. There's more information coming. On the 23rd of this month, the Leader of the Opposition has a big speech. Order. Now, what's the big title of the speech? To inspire the Australian people about his alternative energy plan. A nuclear-powered Australia. Could it work? Question mark, Mr Speaker. Could it work? I table the Leader of the Opposition speech. Always happy to help, Mr Speaker. Now, fair question, well asked, to give credit where it's due. Fair question. But I suggest this, it might be time for the Leader of the Opposition to stop asking questions and maybe start answering a few. Like, how many hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money will it cost? Will it be costed by the Treasury or the Parliamentary Budget Office, Mr Speaker, as it should be? Can they produce more energy than are currently produced by the coal-fired power stations they seek to replace? Because nuclear uses a lot more water than coal, and they said they won't use any more water than coal, Mr Speaker. What will be the impact on bills? Will it be $200 or $400 or $1,000, as various experts have said, Mr Speaker?
Order. The member for
how will the opposition build these nuclear plants when the transmission lines are already full of energy, and they say they won't need any transmission lines, Mr Speaker? These are the real questions the Leader of the Opposition should be answering when he gives this big speech. A nuclear-powered Australia, could it work? I'll give the Leader of the Opposition his final tip, Mr Speaker. This is the last sitting day before his speech. The answer is no.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask for the question to be placed on notice, President.